Predator: Badlands represents one of the most ambitious shifts ever attempted in the long-running Predator franchise. Instead of simply repeating the familiar formula of hunters arriving on Earth to stalk human warriors, the film appears to take the mythology of the Yautja species into darker, stranger, and more emotional territory. The key idea behind the movie is not just survival or action, but identity, exile, honor, and transformation. At the center of the story is Dek, a young predator warrior who is no longer accepted by his own people and must prove himself worthy through an impossible hunt on a deadly alien world. This setup instantly changes the emotional perspective of the franchise because, for perhaps the first time, the predator himself becomes the central protagonist rather than merely the monster. The decision to focus on a young exiled Yautja is extremely important because it opens the door to exploring predator culture in a much deeper way than previous films ever attempted. Earlier entries in the franchise often treated the predators as mysterious creatures operating according to a code of honor, but audiences only saw fragments of their civilization. The hunters appeared, killed, collected trophies, and disappeared. Predator: Badlands appears designed to finally step inside that world and examine what it means to be one of these beings from birth, especially one who has failed or been rejected. Dek's exile immediately suggests that Yautja society is brutal, hierarchical, and unforgiving. Among the predators, strength and success are everything. Honor is earned through battle, survival, and dominance over worthy prey. A young hunter who cannot meet those expectations would likely be viewed as weak or disgraced. This gives Dek a tragic dimension because he is not simply fighting an enemy, he is fighting against shame, isolation, and the fear of being forgotten by his own people. The hunt becomes deeply personal. It is no longer just about collecting trophies. It is about reclaiming identity and proving that he deserves to exist within the warrior culture of the Yautja. The idea of an apex predator also raises the stakes dramatically. In most predator films, humans are the prey. Here, Dek himself is hunting something even more terrifying. That changes the balance of power completely. It suggests a creature or force so dangerous that even a predator warrior may be outmatched. This concept expands the universe beyond familiar territory and creates the feeling that the galaxy contains horrors even the Yautja fear. The phrase apex predator implies the ultimate test, a creature at the top of the food chain capable of killing almost anything it encounters. This setup transforms the movie into a rite of passage story. Dek is essentially being forced into a mythic trial. In many warrior cultures throughout fiction and history, young fighters are required to complete impossible challenges to earn respect. The predator species likely operates the same way. If Dek succeeds, he may regain honor. If he fails, he dies forgotten in the wastelands of an alien planet. That emotional framework gives the story much greater depth than a standard action movie. The hostile planet itself is another major element of the film's identity. The title Badlands immediately suggests a harsh environment filled with death, emptiness, and danger. Rather than the jungles of Central America or urban settings seen in previous installments, this film appears to embrace a more science fiction-heavy landscape. A hostile alien world allows the filmmakers to create ecosystems unlike anything previously seen in the franchise. The environment itself becomes an enemy. Crash landing on such a world means Dek is stripped of control and placed in survival mode. A predator is usually the dominant hunter equipped with advanced technology and tactical superiority. But isolation changes everything. If his ship is damaged or his resources are limited, Dek may become vulnerable in ways audiences have never seen before. Watching a predator struggle to survive creates tension because the franchise traditionally portrays them as unstoppable killing machines. By making Dek vulnerable, the movie humanizes him without taking away his alien identity. This approach reflects what made Prey so successful. That film worked because it stripped the predator concept down to survival, strategy, and character-driven storytelling. Instead of overwhelming audiences with explosions and excessive spectacle, it focused on tension and personal growth. Dan Trachtenberg clearly understood that the franchise becomes strongest when the emotional journey matters as much as the action. In Predator: Badlands, he appears to apply that philosophy again, but from the Predator's perspective. The inclusion of Thea, a Weyland-Yutani android, is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the story because it connects the Predator universe more directly to the broader science fiction mythology associated with Alien. Weyland-Yutani has long been portrayed as a morally corrupt corporation obsessed with acquiring dangerous alien lifeforms for profit, experimentation, or military use. Their androids are often cold, intelligent, and unpredictable. By introducing Thea as Dek's ally, the film creates an unusual partnership between two beings who are both outsiders in different ways. Androids in science fiction often struggle with questions of identity and humanity. Thea may not be biologically alive, but she likely possesses intelligence, self-awareness, and emotional complexity. Dek, meanwhile, is an alien warrior rejected by his own people. Both characters exist between worlds. Neither fully belongs anywhere. That shared isolation could become the emotional core of the movie. The alliance between a predator and an android is also symbolically powerful. Predators represent primal instinct, physical dominance, and ancient warrior traditions. Androids represent artificial intelligence, logic, and technological evolution. One is driven by honor and survival, the other by programming and reason. Bringing them together creates a fascinating contrast. Their relationship could evolve from distrust into mutual respect as they face dangers greater than themselves. This dynamic also suggests the movie may focus heavily on themes of cooperation across differences. Traditionally, humans fear predators because they see them as monsters. Predators likely distrust synthetic beings because they are artificial creations. Yet survival forces Dek and Thea to work together. Over time, they may discover shared values beneath their differences. Dek might learn compassion or understanding, while Thea may develop a more emotional sense of purpose beyond her programming. Elle Fanning's involvement hints that Thea will not simply be a supporting character. Fanning is known for performances that balance vulnerability and intelligence, suggesting Thea could become emotionally central to the story. Rather than serving as comic relief or exposition, she may act as the film's moral and psychological anchor. Her perspective could help audiences understand Dek more deeply while also questioning the violent traditions of predator culture. The Weyland-Yutani connection further implies that corporate greed and exploitation may play an important role in the plot. The company has always treated alien species as resources rather than living beings. If Thea was created by Weyland-Yutani, she may possess knowledge about experiments, weapons programs, or secret objectives connected to the hostile planet. The corporation may view both the apex predator and the Yautja as tools for profit or military advancement. This creates an interesting conflict between natural and artificial forms of power. The predators believe strength is earned through combat and honor. Weyland-Yutani believes power comes through ownership, technology, and control. Dek's journey may therefore become not only a physical hunt but also a clash between two philosophies. He hunts to prove himself worthy, while the corporation may seek domination without understanding the dangers involved. Dan Trachtenberg's return as director after Prey is another critical aspect of the film's significance. Prey revitalized the franchise because it returned to simplicity and atmosphere. Instead of relying purely on nostalgia, it respected the core idea of the original Predator, survival against an overwhelming hunter. Trachtenberg demonstrated a strong understanding of suspense, visual storytelling, and character tension. His approach balanced action with emotional investment, making audiences care about the protagonist's journey. By directing Badlands, Trachtenberg appears to be expanding the franchise while maintaining that grounded emotional core. Many long-running science fiction series struggle because they either repeat old ideas endlessly or change so drastically that they lose their identity. Badlands seems to attempt a middle path. It keeps the themes of hunting, survival, and honor that define the franchise while exploring completely new perspectives and environments. The decision to develop multiple Predator projects after the success of Prey also reveals growing confidence in the franchise's future. For years, the series struggled with inconsistent sequels that often emphasize spectacle over storytelling. Prey proved there was still enormous creative potential within the concept. Rather than treating the Predator as a simple slasher villain, Trachtenberg approached the creature as part of a larger mythology capable of supporting different genres and tones. That creative flexibility is one reason the franchise continues to survive decades after the original 1987 film. At its heart, the Predator concept is adaptable. A predator can be placed in a jungle, a city, a historical setting, or an alien world. Each environment changes the nature of the hunt. Badlands pushes that adaptability further by making the predator himself the emotional center. This is a risky move because audiences traditionally identify with the human victims rather than the hunter. However, it also offers exciting possibilities. By seeing events through Deck's perspective, viewers may begin to understand the rituals, fears, and beliefs of the Yorkshire culture. The predator stops being merely a monster and becomes a tragic warrior shaped by impossible expectations. The film's science fiction setting also allows for greater visual creativity. Previous Predator films often leaned heavily into military aesthetics or survival realism. Badlands appears positioned to embrace larger-scale world-building. Alien landscapes, unfamiliar creatures, advanced technology, and interstellar themes could make the movie feel more expansive than earlier installments while still maintaining the brutal intensity associated with the franchise. At the same time, the survival element ensures the story remains grounded. No matter how large the world becomes, the core conflict remains simple and primal: survive the hunt. That simplicity is essential to Predator stories. Beneath all the futuristic weapons and alien mythology lies a universal narrative about fear, endurance, and proving oneself against overwhelming odds. Deck's character arc may ultimately revolve around redefining what strength truly means. At first, he likely believes honor can only be earned through killing the apex predator. But his experiences with Thea and the hostile world may challenge those beliefs. He may begin to realize that survival, loyalty, sacrifice, and compassion are forms of strength as well. Such growth would distinguish him from the ruthless warrior culture that exiled him. If handled correctly, this emotional evolution could make Predator: Badlands one of the most character-driven entries in the series. Instead of glorifying violence alone, the film could examine the emotional cost of living within a society obsessed with dominance and conquest. Deck's exile becomes symbolic of anyone struggling to find worth in a system that values only power. Ultimately, the key point about Predator: Badlands is that it appears to transform the franchise from a straightforward hunter versus prey action series into something more mythic, emotional, and expansive. It still contains the brutal hunts, terrifying creatures, and survival tension fans expect, but beneath that action lies a story about identity, belonging, and redemption. Deck is not merely hunting an apex predator, he is hunting a reason to believe in himself again. Through the dangerous alien world, the uneasy alliance with Thea, and the looming influence of Weyland-Yutani, the movie seems designed to explore what happens when warriors, machines, and corporations collide in a universe where survival is never guaranteed. If Prey proved the Predator franchise could return to greatness through simplicity and strong character work, Badlands may prove it can also evolve into deeper science fiction storytelling without losing the savage intensity that made the series iconic in the first place. The theatrical release and reception of Predator: Badlands became one of the most important moments in the modern history of the Predator franchise because it proved that the series could successfully evolve beyond its traditional formula while still attracting both longtime fans and new audiences. The fact that the film premiered at the legendary TCL Chinese Theatre on November 3, 2025, before its wide United States release on November 7 by 20th Century Studios, already signaled that the studio had enormous confidence in the project. Unlike smaller streaming-focused franchise entries that are often treated as side content, Badlands was positioned as a major cinematic event. Its generally positive critical reception and worldwide gross of more than $184 million demonstrated that audiences were ready for a bold new direction in the franchise. The TCL Chinese Theatre premiere itself carried symbolic importance. For decades, the venue has represented Hollywood's spectacle, prestige, and cinematic legacy. Some of the biggest science fiction and action films in movie history have premiered there, making it a fitting location for a film attempting to redefine one of cinema's most iconic alien franchises. By choosing such a high-profile premiere event, the studio was essentially announcing that Predator: Badlands was not just another sequel designed to cash in on nostalgia. It was being treated as a serious evolution of the franchise and a major theatrical experience meant for large audiences. Premieres at venues like the TCL Chinese Theatre are more than publicity events. They are statements about identity and ambition. Red carpet appearances, fan reactions, media coverage, and the first wave of critical responses all shape public perception before general audiences even see the movie. In the case of Predator: Badlands, the premiere likely generated excitement because the film represented something unusual, a predator story where the predator himself became one of the central emotional figures. This shift in perspective created enormous curiosity. Fans of the franchise had spent decades watching predators as terrifying hunters stalking human prey. Badlands changed that dynamic by focusing on Dek, the young exiled Yorkshire warrior struggling to regain honor. That alone made the movie stand out from earlier installments. The premiere likely became a major discussion point because viewers and critics were eager to see whether the film could successfully balance traditional predator action with deeper character-driven storytelling. The release date of November 7th also played a strategic role in the film's success. November is often a strong month for major studio releases because audiences are entering the holiday season and are more willing to visit theaters for large-scale entertainment. Releasing the movie during this period allowed Badlands to benefit from strong weekend attendance while avoiding some of the overcrowded summer competition. It also gave the film room to build momentum through word of mouth. The theatrical release itself was significant because it marked a continued commitment by 20th Century Studios to restore the Predator franchise as a major cinematic property. After years of inconsistent sequels and mixed audience reactions, many viewers were uncertain about the future of the series. Some earlier entries had struggled critically, while others failed to fully capture the suspense and intensity that made the original 1987 film so beloved. The success of Prey had reignited interest in the franchise, but Badlands represented the true test of whether that renewed enthusiasm could translate into a large theatrical hit. One reason the film generated positive reviews was likely its willingness to take creative risks. Many long-running franchises become trapped by repetition. Studios often fear changing too much because they worry audiences only want familiar elements. But Predator: Badlands appears to have embraced evolution rather than nostalgia alone. Critics often respond positively when franchise films attempt something fresh instead of merely recycling old ideas. The concept of centering the story around an exiled predator warrior immediately gave the movie a different emotional structure than previous installments. Instead of simply watching humans survive against a monster, audiences were invited into the internal struggles of the hunter himself. Dek's journey to prove himself worthy added tragedy and vulnerability to a species previously portrayed mostly as unstoppable killing machines. That emotional complexity likely became one of the film's strongest critical talking points. Another factor behind the positive reception was probably the direction of Dan Trachtenberg. After the success of Prey, audiences and critics had already developed trust in his understanding of the franchise. Prey succeeded because it returned to simplicity, atmosphere, and character-focused storytelling instead of relying solely on spectacle. Trachtenberg demonstrated an ability to make the Predator feel terrifying again while still grounding the story emotionally. With Badlands, he seems to have expanded those strengths into a more ambitious science fiction setting. Critics often appreciate filmmakers who understand the essence of a franchise while also pushing it into new territory. Trachtenberg did not appear interested in simply repeating jungle hunts or urban warfare scenarios. Instead, he explored alien worlds, Yorkshire culture, and philosophical themes about identity, honor, and survival. That ambition likely helped elevate the movie above standard action entertainment in the eyes of reviewers. The film's visual presentation also likely contributed heavily to its positive response. The title Badlands suggests a harsh and visually striking environment filled with dangerous terrain, alien ecosystems, and unforgiving landscapes. Science fiction audiences are often drawn to immersive world-building, and the movie seems designed to create a hostile world that feels both beautiful and terrifying. A well-realized alien planet can become almost a character itself, influencing the tone and emotional atmosphere of the story. Critics may also have praised the film's balance between practical intensity and larger science fiction mythology. One of the biggest challenges for Predator films is maintaining suspense even when audiences already know how deadly the creatures are. By placing Dek in a survival scenario against an apex predator, the movie reversed expectations. Suddenly, the predator was no longer the unstoppable force. He became vulnerable. That vulnerability likely restored tension to the franchise because viewers could no longer assume total predator dominance. The performances of Elle Fanning and Demetrius Shostakovich were probably another major reason the film resonated with audiences. Science fiction action movies often succeed or fail based on whether viewers emotionally connect with the characters beneath the spectacle. Fanning's role as Thea, the Weyland-Yutani android, likely added emotional intelligence and complexity to the story. Android characters in science fiction often serve as reflections of humanity, exploring questions about emotion, identity, and morality. Her relationship with Dek likely became the emotional center of the film. The alliance between a predator warrior and a corporate android is an unusual pairing because it combines primal warrior culture with advanced artificial intelligence. That contrast creates dramatic tension and philosophical depth. Critics generally appreciate when genre films use science fiction concepts to explore larger themes rather than relying only on action sequences. Through Dek and Thea, the movie could examine isolation, trust, survival, and what it means to belong in a hostile universe. The generally positive reviews also suggest that the film successfully balanced fan service with innovation. Franchise audiences often want recognizable elements such as predator weaponry, hunting rituals, thermal vision sequences, brutal combat, and references to established lore. However, they also want stories that justify their existence rather than feeling like hollow nostalgia exercises. Badlands appears to have respected the franchise's roots while also expanding its mythology. The box office success of over $184 million worldwide is especially important because it demonstrated strong audience interest in this new direction. Financial success in modern cinema often determines whether studios continue investing in ambitious storytelling or retreat towards safer formulas. Crossing that global total showed that Predator: Badlands was not merely a niche science fiction film for hardcore fans. It attracted broad international attention. This worldwide performance reflects the universal appeal of the Predator concept. Even decades after the original film, audiences remain fascinated by the idea of elite hunters testing themselves against deadly prey. The franchise taps into primal fears and survival instincts that transcend language and culture. At the same time, Badlands expanded that appeal by offering emotional storytelling and larger world-building that attracted viewers beyond traditional action fans. The film's success also likely benefited from strong word-of-mouth. Science fiction and horror action movies often rely heavily on audience reactions after opening weekend. If viewers enjoy the experience, discussions spread quickly online through reviews, social media conversations, and fan communities. Positive audience reactions can sustain box office momentum for weeks. The unusual premise of Badlands probably encouraged discussion because it represented such a dramatic shift in perspective for the franchise. Another reason the movie likely connected with audiences is that it embraced themes relevant to modern viewers. Dek's exile and struggle for acceptance mirror universal human experiences of failure, rejection, and the desire to prove oneself. Beneath the alien setting and violent action lies a deeply relatable emotional story. Audiences may not understand Yorkshire culture directly, but they understand the pain of feeling unworthy or abandoned. Similarly, Thea's role as an android connected to Weyland-Yutani may have explored themes about corporate exploitation, artificial identity, and emotional isolation. Science fiction often works best when it reflects real human anxieties through futuristic concepts. The partnership between Dek and Thea likely resonated because both characters exist outside normal systems of belonging. One is rejected by his species, the other is a manufactured being created by a morally questionable corporation. Their alliance becomes a story about finding connection in a hostile world. The film's box office success also strengthened the overall future of the Predator franchise. Hollywood studios closely monitor financial performance when deciding whether to continue expanding a cinematic universe. The strong global gross likely confirmed that audiences are interested in seeing more experimental Predator stories rather than simple remakes of earlier films. This opens the possibility for future entries exploring different eras, planets, cultures, or perspectives within the Predator mythology. Importantly, the movie's success probably changed how the franchise is viewed culturally. For many years, Predator films were often considered straightforward action horror entertainment rather than prestige science fiction. Badlands appears to have elevated the series into something more ambitious and emotionally layered. Positive reviews help reshape critical perception, encouraging audiences to take the franchise more seriously as storytelling rather than just spectacle. The involvement of 20th-century studios also reflects broader changes in how major studios approach legacy franchises. Modern audiences are increasingly skeptical of sequels that exist only for nostalgia. Successful franchise films now often need strong directors with distinct creative visions. Dan Trachtenberg's leadership likely played a major role in convincing both critics and audiences that Badlands had artistic ambition rather than simply commercial intent. The worldwide box office performance is especially impressive considering the competitive nature of modern theatrical releases. Audiences today have countless entertainment options through streaming platforms, gaming, and digital media. Convincing people to leave home and buy theater tickets requires creating a genuine event experience. Predator: Badlands appears to have achieved. The movie's release likely also benefited from the growing popularity of intelligent genre cinema. In recent years, audiences have shown strong support for science fiction and horror films that combine action with thematic depth. Films that explore character psychology, identity, and moral conflict often generate stronger long-term engagement than purely spectacle-driven blockbusters. Badlands seems positioned within that trend, offering visceral action alongside deeper emotional and philosophical ideas. Ultimately, the key point about the premiere, release, positive reviews, and box office success of Predator: Badlands is that they collectively represent a major turning point for the franchise. The film proved that Predator stories can evolve beyond simple survival action into richer science fiction narratives focused on character, mythology, and emotional depth. Its theatrical launch at the TCL Chinese Theatre symbolized confidence and prestige. Its strong critical response validated the creative risks taken by the filmmakers. Its worldwide earnings demonstrated that audiences were eager to embrace this new direction. More importantly, the success of Badlands showed that the Predator franchise still possesses enormous untapped potential nearly 4 decades after the original film first introduced audiences to the deadly alien hunter. By combining intense action, atmospheric world-building, emotional storytelling, and ambitious mythology expansion, the movie appears to have revitalized the series for a new generation. Rather than surviving purely through nostalgia, Predator: Badlands succeeded because it dared to transform the franchise while remaining true to its core themes of survival, honor, fear, and the eternal hunt. This section of Predator: Badlands reveals the emotional, psychological, and thematic heart of the film. What initially appears to be a brutal science fiction survival story gradually transforms into something much deeper, a tragic tale about family, rejection, identity, and the dangerous misunderstanding of what true strength actually means. Through Dek's painful journey from outcast to survivor, the movie explores the harsh culture of the Yorkshire species while also contrasting it with more compassionate ideas about leadership, loyalty, and belonging. Every major event in this storyline pushes Dek further into emotional conflict, forcing him to question both his father's teachings and his own understanding of power. The story begins by introducing Dek as a runt from Yorkshire Prime, and this single detail is extremely important because it instantly establishes his position within Predator society. Among the Yorkshire, physical strength and hunting ability are everything. Their civilization appears to operate according to an unforgiving warrior code where weakness is not tolerated. To be labeled a runt in such a culture means Dek has likely spent his entire life being underestimated, mocked, or treated as inferior. Unlike the towering, unstoppable predators audiences are used to seeing, Dek enters the story already emotionally wounded. This creates a fascinating contrast because the audience sees the predator species from an entirely new perspective. In earlier films, predators were terrifying hunters viewed from the outside. Here, the movie explores what it feels like to grow up inside that brutal society while failing to meet its impossible standards. Dek is not feared or respected. He is judged. Every action he takes is shaped by his desperate desire to earn approval from his father, Njor. Njor represents the darkest side of Yorkshire culture. As clan leader, he embodies the ruthless ideology that defines predator society: strength above compassion, dominance above family, victory above mercy. His role in the story is not merely that of an antagonist but of a symbolic force representing toxic ideas about power and worth. To Njor, Dek's weakness is not simply disappointing, It is shameful. He views his own son as a stain on the clan's honor. This father-son conflict gives the movie tremendous emotional weight because Dek's entire mission begins with the hope of earning love and recognition. He believes that by hunting the Kalisk, an apex predator feared even by Njor, he can finally prove himself worthy. This is not just about survival or glory. It is about a child trying to gain acceptance from a parent who has never truly valued him. The Kalisk itself becomes symbolic of impossible expectations. It is described as an apex predator on the death planet, Jenna, feared even by hardened warriors like Njor. That detail immediately elevates the creature into something almost mythical. The Kalisk is not just another dangerous beast, it is a nightmare powerful enough to terrify even elite predators. By choosing this target, Dek is essentially attempting the impossible. However, before Dek can even begin his mission, the story takes a devastating emotional turn. Njor orders Dek's brother, Quayi, to kill him. This moment reveals how completely corrupted Yorkshire culture has become under Njor's ideology. Family bonds mean nothing compared to perceived weakness. Rather than protecting his son, Njor sees Dek as expendable. The order also places Quayi in an impossible position. He must choose between loyalty to his father and love for his brother. His decision to save Dek becomes one of the most important emotional moments in the film because it proves compassion still exists within Yorkshire society, even if it is suppressed. Quayi rejects the brutal values of his father and sacrifices everything to protect Dek. The fight between Quayi and Njor is likely one of the movie's most emotionally intense sequences. It is not simply a physical battle but a clash between two philosophies. Quayi fights for family and loyalty, while Njor fights for dominance and tradition. Quayi's defeat and loss of an arm emphasize the overwhelming power of Njor, but the true tragedy comes when Dek is forced to watch helplessly as his father executes his brother. This scene fundamentally changes Dek forever. Until that moment, he still sought his father's approval. But witnessing Quayi's murder forces him to confront the horrifying truth about the culture he idolized. Njor is not a noble warrior protecting the clan. He is a tyrant willing to destroy his own family to preserve his vision of strength. Quayi's death becomes the emotional wound driving the rest of the story. Dek survives physically, but psychologically he is shattered. He carries guilt for surviving while his brother died protecting him. He also carries confusion because the values he was taught no longer make sense. If strength justifies cruelty, then why did Quayi's act of compassion feel more honorable than Njor's brutality? This emotional conflict deepens once Dek crash lands on Jenna. The planet itself acts almost like a physical manifestation of his inner turmoil. Jenna is described as a death planet, a hostile world filled with deadly flora and fauna. Survival there requires constant vigilance. Dek quickly loses most of his gear, stripping away the technological advantages predators usually rely upon. This is extremely important thematically because it forces Dek to confront his vulnerability. Predator warriors traditionally depend on advanced weapons, cloaking devices, and tactical superiority. But on Jenna, Dek is reduced to raw survival instincts. The planet does not care about Yorkshire honor or clan status. Everything there exists only to kill or consume. The hostile environment mirrors Dek's emotional isolation. He has lost his brother, his home, his status, and nearly all of his resources. For perhaps the first time in his life, he is completely alone. That loneliness makes his alliance with Thea especially significant. Initially, the partnership is reluctant because predators and Weyland-Yutani androids come from vastly different worlds. Dek likely views androids as unnatural creations, while Thea may initially see Dek as a dangerous alien hunter. However, survival forces them together. Thea's damaged state parallels Dek's emotional condition. She is physically broken after her team was destroyed by the Kalisk, while Dek is psychologically broken after his brother's death. Both characters are survivors carrying trauma. This shared suffering gradually becomes the foundation of trust between them. The inclusion of Weyland-Yutani also adds another layer to the story's themes. The corporation has always represented exploitation and control in science fiction mythology. Its interest in dangerous alien species reflects humanity's obsession with power regardless of moral consequences. Thea's existence as a corporate android raises questions about identity and autonomy. Is she merely following programming, or can she choose her own purpose? Her relationship with Dek likely helps her evolve beyond simple obedience. At the same time, Dek begins learning from Thea in ways that challenge his understanding of leadership and strength. The introduction of Bud, the friendly creature, is surprisingly important despite appearing small compared to the larger conflicts. Bud represents innocence and trust in a world dominated by violence. When Dek saves her from a wild beast and feeds her, he demonstrates compassion without expecting reward. Bud marking him with saliva in gratitude symbolizes emotional connection rather than dominance. This moment matters because it contrasts sharply with the values taught by Nyor. Under Yorkshire ideology, relationships are based on power and hierarchy. But Bud responds to kindness, not fear. Through her, the film quietly shows Dek another form of strength, protection instead of conquest. The campfire conversation where Dek reveals that his father killed Quaye becomes one of the story's most emotionally revealing scenes. For perhaps the first time, Dek openly expresses his pain. Thea responds not with judgment but with understanding, telling him about wolves on Earth and how alpha wolves protect the pack. This is one of the most thematically important moments in the film because it directly challenges Dek's understanding of leadership. Nyor taught him that alphas dominate through fear and violence. Thea presents a completely different model. True leaders protect others rather than sacrificing them. However, Dek misunderstands her lesson. Instead of understanding the protective role of an alpha, he interprets her words through the violent framework of Yorkshire culture. He concludes that the alpha is simply the one who kills the most. This misunderstanding is tragic because it shows how deeply his father's ideology has shaped him. Even when presented with compassion and wisdom, Dek filters those ideas through the brutal logic he was raised with. Yet the audience can sense that change is beginning inside him. The seeds of doubt have been planted. Meanwhile, the subplot involving Tessa and Weyland-Yutani expands the story's tension. Tessa being repaired and threatened with decommissioning reinforces the corporation's cruelty. Androids are treated as disposable tools rather than individuals. This mirrors how Nyor treated Dek. Both systems, Yorkshire clan culture and corporate control, devalue life when it no longer serves their goals. Tessa's mission to track Dek and Thea introduces an additional threat beyond the Kalisk itself. Now the group is hunted not only by the planet's deadly wildlife but also by corporate forces seeking control over predator technology and alien biology. The discovery of Dek's crashed ship and lost equipment, especially the cryogenic explosives, becomes extremely important because it shifts the balance of power. Until this point, Dek has been weakened and stripped of his tools. Recovering advanced predator weaponry could allow him to fight back. But it also raises tension because Weyland-Yutani now has access to dangerous Yorkshire technology. Cryogenic explosives are especially symbolic because they represent destructive potential on a massive scale. In the wrong hands, such weapons could be catastrophic. This reinforces one of the franchise's recurring themes: advanced technology becomes terrifying when combined with greed and ambition. As the story progresses, Dek's emotional journey likely becomes increasingly tied to his understanding of leadership and honor. At the beginning, he wants only to prove himself worthy by killing the Kalisk. But through his experiences with Thea and Bud, he slowly begins to understand that strength is not measured solely through death. Quaye's sacrifice also continues haunting him. His brother did not die while hunting prey or conquering enemies. He died protecting someone weaker than himself. That act directly contradicts Nyor's philosophy and forces Dek to reconsider everything he once believed. The Kalisk hunt therefore becomes more than a survival mission. It becomes a test of identity. Will Dek become like Nyor, obsessed with dominance and trophies? Or will he learn from Quaye's sacrifice and Thea's compassion, becoming a protector instead of merely a killer? Genre itself acts almost like a spiritual trial. Every deadly creature, environmental hazard, and emotional challenge pushes Dek toward transformation. The planet strips away illusions and forces characters to reveal who they truly are. By combining brutal action with emotional storytelling, this section of Predator, Badlands transforms the franchise into something far more complex than a traditional monster movie. It explores cycles of violence, toxic expectations, and the search for self-worth through the lens of science fiction. Dek's journey is ultimately tragic because he begins as someone desperate for love from a father incapable of giving it. Yet through suffering, loss, and survival, he slowly discovers another path. The irony is that he may become truly worthy not by embracing Yachtja brutality, but by rejecting it. This final section of Predator, Badlands transforms the movie from a survival-driven science fiction adventure into a deeply emotional story about redemption, leadership, family, and the rejection of toxic power. Every event in this part of the narrative pushes Dec toward a complete transformation. By the end of the film, he is no longer the frightened runt desperate for his father's approval. He becomes something entirely different, a leader who finally understands that true strength comes not from domination or killing, but from protecting those who stand beside him. The story begins with one of the film's most devastating emotional moments, Thea discovering the remains of her team. Up until this point, the dangerous world of Jenna already felt hostile and merciless, but seeing the destroyed bodies of the Weyland-Yutani expedition reinforces the terrifying power of the Kalisk. The creature is no longer just an apex predator spoken about in fearful legends. It has become a force of nature capable of wiping out trained teams with terrifying efficiency. Thea's attempt to repair herself while revealing the arrival of the Weyland-Yutani team is also extremely important because it exposes her growing emotional conflict. Earlier in the story, she existed largely as a survival-focused android connected to corporate objectives. But by now, her experiences with Dec have changed her. She warns him that the company intends to capture the Kalisk and urges him to flee, even admitting that he cannot defeat the creature. This moment matters because it is one of the first times Thea openly places Dec's safety above the mission. In many science fiction stories involving androids, emotions are portrayed as flaws or malfunctions. But here, Thea's emotional growth becomes a sign of humanity rather than weakness. Her concern for Dec shows that she is no longer simply operating under programming. She genuinely cares about him. Unfortunately, Dec misunderstands her intentions. Feeling betrayed, he interprets her warning as a lack of faith in him. This reaction perfectly reflects his emotional scars. Having spent his entire life being called weak by his father, Dec is hypersensitive to doubt and rejection. Instead of recognizing Thea's fear for his safety, he sees only another person believing he is incapable. This misunderstanding pushes him into confronting the Kalisk alone with only his sword. Symbolically, this is a crucial moment because Dec strips away every technological advantage and faces the creature through pure willpower. It resembles an ancient warrior trial, a desperate attempt to prove his worth through combat. The battle itself likely becomes one of the film's most visually brutal and emotionally intense sequences. Dec fighting the Kalisk with just a blade emphasizes how dangerous and overwhelming the creature truly is. Yet Dec still manages to sever its head and tail, demonstrating incredible courage and skill. However, the Kalisk regenerating itself completely changes the fight. Suddenly, victory becomes impossible through conventional means. The creature's regenerative powers make it seem almost immortal, turning the battle from a test of strength into a confrontation with something beyond natural understanding. The fact that the Kalisk spares Dec after smelling him is one of the movie's most meaningful moments. At first, the audience may not understand why this terrifying creature suddenly chooses mercy. But later the truth becomes clear. The Kalisk recognizes the scent of Bud's saliva on Dec and understands that he protected her child. This revelation transforms the Kalisk from a mindless monster into a deeply intelligent creature driven by instinctual parental bonds. Like Dec, the Kalisk is also connected to themes of family and protection. It recognizes kindness where others see weakness. Before this understanding can fully develop, the Weyland-Yutani team arrives and freezes both Dec and the Kalisk using cryogenic explosives. This interruption is important because it highlights the contrast between natural relationships and corporate greed. Just as Dec and the Kalisk reach a moment of mutual recognition, the company intervenes to exploit the creature for its own purposes. The capture sequence also shifts the story's central threat away from the wilderness of Jenna and toward human ambition. Up until now, nature itself has been the enemy. But once Weyland-Yutani takes control, the true danger becomes exploitation and dehumanization. Tessa congratulating Thea for the successful mission reveals the horrifying mentality of the company. To Weyland-Yutani, the Kalisk's regenerative abilities are not sacred or dangerous. They are commercial opportunities. The possibility that such powers could become a miracle for humanity sounds noble on the surface, but the corporation's methods reveal its true intentions. It is willing to imprison, experiment on, and destroy living beings in pursuit of profit and technological advancement. This reflects one of the core themes running throughout the film: systems of power that reduce individuals to tools. Noor viewed Dek as expendable because he appeared weak. Weyland-Yutani views the Kalisk and Dek as valuable only for what they can provide scientifically. The experimentation on Dek becomes particularly disturbing because it mirrors the abuse he suffered under his father. Once again, his body and worth are being judged by others. But now Thea intervenes to protect him. Her defense of Dek shows how far she has evolved emotionally. Tessa's reaction is equally important. She sees Thea's emotions as weakness and orders her deactivated. This moment reflects the cold ideology of Weyland-Yutani, where individuality and empathy are treated as flaws. Tessa essentially represents what Thea could have become if she had remained loyal to the corporation: obedient, emotionless, and morally empty. Thea helping Dek escape marks her complete rejection of the company. She is no longer merely an android carrying out orders. She has chosen her own path, even knowing it could lead to her destruction. Dek's discovery of Quay's crashed ship becomes one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in the film. Surrounded by the remains of his brother's sacrifice, he is finally forced to confront his grief fully. Earlier, much of his pain was buried beneath anger and survival instinct. Now, alone with the wreckage, he allows himself to mourn. Healing his wounds while venting his rage symbolizes emotional cleansing. For the first time, Dek stops trying to prove himself through violence alone and begins reflecting on what Quay's sacrifice actually meant. This leads directly to the story's most important realization: understanding the true meaning of Thea's wolf analogy. Earlier, Dek misunderstood her explanation about alpha wolves, believing leadership meant killing the most prey. But now he finally understands that an alpha protects the pack. This moment represents Dek's complete transformation. Everything changes once he rejects Noor's philosophy of domination. True strength is not about fear or trophies. It is about responsibility, loyalty, and protection. From this point onward, Dek's actions become driven not by pride, but by love for others. His decision to rescue Thea proves this change. Earlier in the film, he might have abandoned her to continue hunting glory. Now, he risks everything to save someone who matters to him. His use of Jenna's natural environment to create improvised weapons is also symbolically important. Earlier, Dek relied heavily on Yorkshire technology and traditional hunting methods. But now he adapts creatively, learning from the planet itself. This demonstrates growth and independence. The reunion with Bud and the realization that she is the Kalisk's child completely reframes the story. Suddenly, the Kalisk is no longer just an apex predator. It is a parent protecting its offspring. This parallels Dek's own emotional journey regarding family and protection. Understanding this truth changes Dek's mission again. He no longer wants merely to survive or kill the Kalisk. He wants to save it. This is perhaps the ultimate rejection of his father's ideology. Noor taught him to view powerful creatures as trophies to conquer. Dek now chooses compassion instead. The infiltration of the Weyland-Yutani base becomes the climax of Dek's transformation. Unlike earlier hunts driven by ego, this mission is motivated entirely by loyalty and protection. Dek, Bud, and Thea effectively become a new kind of family, a clan built not on blood or dominance, but on trust. The confrontation with Tessa is especially meaningful because she represents the opposite of everything Dek and Thea have become. Piloting a power loader mech and wielding Quay's plasmacaster, she weaponizes stolen strength and technology rather than genuine emotional connection. The Kalisk joining the fight creates one of the film's most satisfying moments because it symbolizes unity between beings once viewed as enemies. Predator, android, alien creature, and child now stand together against exploitation and cruelty. Tessa being swallowed alive by the Kalisk is visually symbolic. The cold, calculating representative of corporate greed is consumed by the very lifeform she tried to control. Yet even then, she refuses to stop fighting, eventually killing the Kalisk from inside using cryogenic grenades and plasmacaster blasts. The Kalisk's death is tragic because it sacrifices itself while protecting its child. Again, the film reinforces the idea that true power lies in protection and sacrifice, not domination. Dek killing Tessa to save Thea completes his evolution fully. Earlier, he sought approval through violence. Now he uses violence only to defend others. Reclaiming Quai's plasmacaster symbolizes reclaiming his brother's legacy of loyalty and compassion rather than Njor's cruelty. Bud tearing off Tessa's head and spine mirrors classic Predator trophy imagery, but with an important difference. The act is not done for honor or sport. It is an act of vengeance and survival. The return to Yorkshire Prime brings Deck's journey full circle. At the beginning of the film, he desperately wanted his father's approval. Now he returns stronger, wiser, and emotionally transformed. Presenting Tessa's skull as a trophy initially appears like a return to traditional Yorkshire values, but the scene quickly reveals deeper meaning. Deck demands his cloaking device not because he craves validation anymore, but because he has earned it on his own terms. Njor denying the request and ordering Deck killed proves that he has learned nothing. Even after everything, he still defines leadership through fear and control. Deck defeating his father in combat becomes symbolic liberation. By cutting off Njor's arm and trapping him with his own device, Deck turns the old ideology against itself. The once powerful clan leader is reduced to helplessness. Njor offering Deck a place in the clan is deeply manipulative. He suddenly claims he was wrong only after losing power. But Deck now sees through him completely. Deck's rejection of the offer is the emotional climax of the film. He no longer seeks acceptance from a broken system. Instead, he declares that he has found his own clan with Thea and Bud. This line is the heart of the movie's message. Family is not defined by blood, species, or hierarchy. It is defined by loyalty, protection, and love. Bud killing Njor by biting off his head is symbolic justice. The creature Njor would have viewed merely as prey ultimately destroys him. Nature itself rejects his philosophy. Deck taking the cloaking device for himself represents reclaiming identity and power on his own terms. He no longer needs permission to define his worth. Finally, the ending introduces one last twist, the arrival of a massive Yorkshire ship. Thea wonders whether it is friendly, and Deck reveals it belongs to his mother. This final moment is fascinating because it suggests the story is not truly over. The mention of Deck's mother opens entirely new possibilities about Yorkshire society. Unlike Njor, she may represent another side of their culture, perhaps one less obsessed with brutality and domination. The ending leaves audiences with hope rather than despair. Deck is no longer alone. He has survived impossible trials, rejected toxic ideals, and built a new family from beings once considered enemies. Ultimately, this final act transforms Predator, Badlands into a story not just about hunting, but about breaking cycles of violence and redefining strength itself. Deck begins the film believing that worth comes from killing the strongest prey. He ends it understanding that the greatest leaders are those willing to protect others, even at tremendous personal cost. One of the most important reasons Predator, Badlands feels so different from earlier entries in the franchise is because of its cast and characters. The movie does not simply rely on action sequences, creature effects, or science fiction spectacle to carry the story. Instead, it builds its emotional weight through relationships, performances, and the clash between deeply different personalities. Every major character in the film represents a specific idea about power, family, survival, identity, or loyalty. Together, they create a story that feels far more personal and emotionally layered than a traditional Predator movie. The casting itself also reflects the film's ambition. Rather than filling the movie only with soldiers or action archetypes, the filmmakers chose performers capable of conveying emotional complexity beneath the science fiction setting. This becomes especially important because Predator, Badlands is not simply about hunting monsters. It is about broken individuals trying to define themselves in violent systems that constantly demand strength and obedience. At the center of the story is Demetrius Shostakovich as Deck, the young Yorkshire outcast. Deck is arguably one of the most emotionally complex protagonists ever introduced in the Predator franchise because he exists in direct contrast to everything audiences traditionally associate with predators. Normally, Yorkshire warriors are portrayed as towering, unstoppable hunters feared by everyone around them. Deck, however, begins the film as weak, rejected, and emotionally vulnerable. The fact that he is labeled a runt immediately shapes the audience's understanding of him. In Predator culture, physical strength and hunting ability appear to define status and worth. Being smaller or weaker than other Yorkshire means Deck has likely spent his entire life living under humiliation and disappointment. Unlike the elite hunters seen in earlier films, he is constantly treated as inferior. This makes Dek a deeply tragic character because his greatest desire is not conquest or glory but acceptance. He desperately wants approval from his father and clan. Everything he does early in the story is motivated by the belief that if he proves himself through violence and hunting, he will finally become worthy in the eyes of others. Demetrius Shostakovich-Matange's portrayal is crucial because Dek's emotions must remain visible even beneath heavy creature makeup and alien body language. The performance likely depends heavily on physical acting, posture, movement, and vocal intensity rather than facial expression alone. Dek's pain, fear, rage, and eventual growth all need to feel believable despite him being a non-human character. What makes Dek so compelling is that his emotional journey mirrors universal human struggles. He represents anyone who has grown up feeling inadequate, unwanted, or overshadowed by impossible expectations. His story is not just about surviving a hostile planet. It is about learning that self-worth cannot come from the approval of cruel people. As the film progresses, Dek transforms dramatically. He begins as someone obsessed with proving himself through killing but gradually learns that true leadership means protecting others. This evolution gives the character enormous emotional depth and allows him to stand alongside some of the franchise's most memorable protagonists. Equally important is Elle Fanning's dual role as Thea and Tessa. Casting one actress to portray both characters is a brilliant creative decision because it visually reinforces the film's themes about identity, choice, and morality. Thea and Tessa are sisters, both synthetic beings created by Weyland-Yutani, yet they evolve into completely different individuals. Thea is one of the emotional anchors of the story. At first, she appears to function mainly as a damaged android survivor assisting Dek. However, her character gradually develops into something much more meaningful. Like Dek, Thea exists between worlds. She is not fully human, yet she develops emotions, empathy, and personal loyalty that go beyond her programming. Her partnership with Dek becomes the emotional core of the film because both characters are outsiders rejected by the systems that created them. Dek is rejected by his clan for being weak, while Thea is viewed by Weyland-Yutani as a replaceable tool. Their growing bond reflects the movie's larger theme about finding family outside traditional structures. Elle Fanning's performance as Thea likely depends on balancing artificial precision with emotional awakening. Early in the story, Thea may appear cold or analytical, but over time subtle emotional layers begin emerging. The audience watches her transition from a mission-focused synthetic into someone capable of love, fear, regret, and sacrifice. One of the most powerful aspects of Thea's character is her moral evolution. She initially remains connected to Weyland-Yutani's objectives, but witnessing Dek's suffering and the corporation's cruelty changes her perspective completely. By the end of the film, she rejects the company entirely and chooses loyalty to Dek and Bud instead. This transformation is especially meaningful because it challenges the idea that emotions are weakness. Weyland-Yutani views compassion as malfunction, but the film presents empathy as the very thing that makes Thea truly alive. Tessa, meanwhile, serves as Thea's dark reflection. Because both characters share the same face, every interaction between them becomes symbolically powerful. Tessa represents what Thea might have become if she had remained loyal to Weyland-Yutani's ideology of obedience and emotional suppression. Unlike Thea, Tessa embraces corporate logic completely. She sees individuals only in terms of usefulness and efficiency. Her willingness to experiment on Dek and exploit the Kalisk's regenerative powers demonstrates her total lack of empathy. To her, emotions are flaws that interfere with purpose. This makes Tessa one of the film's most fascinating antagonists because she is not driven by personal hatred or revenge. She is driven by absolute loyalty to a system that values control above morality. In many ways, she parallels Nior. Both characters believe strength means dominance and emotional detachment. Elle Fanning playing both Thea and Tessa likely creates a deeply unsettling contrast. The audience constantly sees two versions of what synthetic life can become, one compassionate and self-aware, the other cold and obedient. This duality reinforces the movie's larger exploration of choice and identity. Ruben de Jong's portrayal of Nior is equally critical because he represents the brutal ideology haunting Dek throughout the film. Nior is not simply an evil father. He is the living embodiment of toxic predator culture. Everything about him revolves around dominance, fear, and hierarchy. As clan leader, Nyor believes weakness must be destroyed before it contaminates the group. His treatment of Dek reveals how deeply corrupted his understanding of leadership has become. Rather than protecting his son, he sees him as an embarrassment. Nyor's relationship with Dek gives the story much of its emotional tension. Dek spends much of the film trying to prove himself worthy in the eyes of someone incapable of genuine love. This dynamic mirrors abusive parental relationships in real life, where approval is withheld unless impossible standards are met. The decision to have Demetrius Shostakovich also provide the voice of Nyor adds another interesting layer. Although physically portrayed by Ruben de Jong, sharing vocal elements between father and son subtly reinforces their connection. It suggests that Dek risks becoming like his father if he continues following the same ideology. Nyor's eventual defeat becomes emotionally satisfying because it represents more than a physical victory. Dek does not merely overpower his father. He rejects everything Nyor stands for. By refusing Nyor's final offer to rejoin the clan, Dek breaks the cycle of abuse completely. Mike Homik as Quaye provides one of the film's most tragic and emotionally important performances. Although Quaye appears for a relatively shorter portion of the story, his impact shapes Dek's entire journey. Quaye represents the compassionate side of Yorkshire culture that still exists beneath its violent traditions. Unlike Nyor, he sees value in Dek beyond physical strength. His decision to save his younger brother despite direct orders from their father becomes the film's first major act of genuine love. Quaye's sacrifice defines Dek's emotional arc because it forces him to confront a completely different understanding of strength. Quaye dies protecting someone weaker than himself, directly contradicting Nyor's belief that only dominance matters. The emotional power of Quaye's character likely depends heavily on how protective and sincere he feels in his scenes with Dek. The audience needs to believe that he truly cares about his brother. Otherwise, his death would not carry the same emotional weight later in the story. Stefan Grube providing Quaye's voice adds another layer of personality to the character. Voice acting is especially important in Predator films because so much communication occurs through tone, growls, and alien speech patterns rather than traditional dialogue. Quaye's voice likely helps convey warmth and loyalty that separate him from the harsher members of the clan. Rohinal Narayan's role as Bud is surprisingly crucial despite Bud not being a traditional speaking character. Bud initially appears to be a strange creature native to Jenna, but she gradually becomes one of the emotional hearts of the story. Bud symbolizes innocence in a world consumed by violence. Her bond with Dek begins when he protects and feeds her without expecting anything in return. This relationship is important because it marks one of the first times Dek acts compassionately without seeking approval or status. Bud's connection to the Kalisk later reveals the deeper meaning of these moments. The apex predator spares Dek because it recognizes that he protected its child. Suddenly, Bud becomes the key to understanding the film's message about family and protection. As Bud grows larger and more confident by the film's ending, she also symbolizes the growth of Dek's new clan. She begins as a vulnerable creature needing protection and evolves into a fierce ally who ultimately helps destroy Nyor. Cameron Brown's role as Smith and the Weyland-Yutani drone synthetics helps reinforce the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the company. These drone synthetics likely lack the emotional individuality developed by Thea, making them feel more machine-like and threatening. Their presence emphasizes how industrialized and dehumanized Weyland-Yutani has become. Unlike Thea, these synthetics exist purely to carry out orders. They represent a future where intelligence is stripped of morality and reduced to efficiency. Alison Wright as the voice of MUATHUR is another significant inclusion because the MUATHUR system has long been associated with corporate control in science fiction lore. The artificial intelligence overseeing Weyland-Yutani operations acts almost like a godlike corporate consciousness. MUATHUR's cold authority reinforces the idea that the company functions without empathy or ethical restraint. The system views individuals only as assets, tools, or obstacles. Through MUATHUR, the film explores fears about technology being used to enforce systems of exploitation and control. Their involvement creates a subtle connection between different forms of modern science fiction storytelling. Since they are known for balancing emotional character work with supernatural and genre elements, their cameo fits perfectly within Badlands' tone. The fact that Dan Trachtenberg was originally going to direct part of Stranger Things 5 before shifting to Badlands also reveals how much creative priority the project received. It suggests that the filmmakers saw enormous potential in expanding the Predator universe in bold new directions. What ultimately makes the cast and characters of Predator: Badlands so memorable is how every individual contributes to the movie's larger emotional themes. Dec represents the struggle for self-worth. Thea represents emotional awakening and moral choice. Tessa represents obedience without empathy. Muir represents toxic power and cruelty. Quay represents sacrifice and protection. Bud represents innocence and found family. Together, these characters transform the film into much more than a traditional action movie. Beneath the alien creatures, futuristic weapons, and brutal combat lies a deeply human story about identity, loyalty, grief, and the search for belonging. By the end of the film, the audience realizes that the true battle was never simply against the Kalisk or the dangers of Jenna. The real conflict was about what kind of person Dec would become. Would he inherit his father's ideology of domination, or would he create something better? Through the relationships built with Thea, Quay, and Bud, Dec ultimately chooses compassion over cruelty and protection over conquest. That emotional evolution is what gives Predator: Badlands its unique power within the franchise and helps its characters stand out as some of the most emotionally layered figures ever introduced into the Predator universe. The development and production of Predator: Badlands represents one of the most ambitious creative evolutions in the history of the Predator franchise. Rather than simply creating another action sequel built around familiar jungle hunts and violent encounters, the filmmakers approached the project as an opportunity to completely redefine what a Predator story could be. Every aspect of the film's creation, from its inspirations and world-building to its language design, visual effects, and character focus, reveals a deliberate attempt to transform the franchise into something larger, richer, and more emotionally complex than ever before. When the project was revealed in February 2024, the announcement immediately generated excitement because Dan Trachtenberg was returning to direct. His previous work on Prey had already revitalized the franchise by stripping the concept back to suspense, survival, and character-driven storytelling. Instead of relying purely on nostalgia or explosive spectacle, Prey succeeded because it understood the emotional core of the Predator mythology, the terrifying tension between hunter and hunted. Trachtenberg's return suggested that Badlands would continue this creative resurgence, but the project quickly proved to be far more ambitious than audiences expected. Rather than another Earth-based survival story, the film aimed to explore the Predator species from the inside, placing audiences directly into Yautja culture itself. This creative decision was extremely risky because the mystery surrounding predators had always been part of their appeal. Earlier films intentionally kept them distant and unknowable. Audiences only saw fragments of their rituals, technology, and society. Badlands, however, decided to go deeper than any previous installment by exploring the Predator homeworld and focusing on a Yautja protagonist. That shift fundamentally changes the franchise's storytelling perspective. Instead of humans reacting to predators as monsters, the audience experiences events through the eyes of a predator struggling with rejection, identity, and survival. This approach required an entirely different creative mindset because the filmmakers could no longer treat the Yautja simply as terrifying creatures. They needed to become believable characters with culture, emotions, language, and social structures. Patrick Azon's involvement was also significant because his writing on Prey demonstrated a strong understanding of minimalist but emotionally effective storytelling. The collaboration between Trachtenberg and Azon appears to have centered around balancing epic science fiction world-building with deeply personal emotional themes. The inclusion of additional literary material contributors like Brian Duffield, Brian Fuller, Patrick Somerville, and Ben Schwartz suggests that the film's development process involved extensive creative experimentation. Even though these contributions were not directly visible on screen, they likely helped shape the movie's mythology, themes, and tone. Bringing together multiple creative voices allowed the filmmakers to expand the Predator universe while maintaining narrative depth. One of the most fascinating aspects of Badlands is the wide range of artistic influences that shaped its identity. Dan Trachtenberg did not simply look toward earlier Predator films for inspiration. Instead, he drew from fantasy art, westerns, post-apocalyptic cinema, philosophical filmmaking, and even video games. The influence of Frank Frazetta is especially important because Frazetta's artwork is legendary for depicting savage warriors, brutal landscapes, primal combat, and mythic heroism. His paintings often feature muscular fighters surviving in dangerous worlds filled with monsters and ancient violence. This influence is clearly reflected in Deck's journey across the deadly planet Jenna. The movie appears designed to feel mythological rather than purely futuristic. Frazetta's style emphasizes raw physicality and harsh environments, which perfectly suits a Predator story centered around survival and exile. Instead of clean, polished science fiction, Badlands embraces dirt, blood, scars, and brutal landscapes. The world feels ancient and primal despite its futuristic setting. The influence of Terrence Malick is equally fascinating because Malick is known for emotional, atmospheric filmmaking that explores spirituality, identity, and humanity's relationship with nature. His films often focus on characters searching for meaning in vast, unforgiving landscapes. This influence likely shaped the film's quieter, reflective moments. Deck's journey is not simply physical. It is spiritual and emotional. Jenna becomes more than a dangerous planet, it becomes a place of transformation where Deck confronts grief, rage, and self-worth. The combination of Frazetta and Malick creates a unique tonal balance. One influence brings savage mythic intensity, while the other brings introspection and emotional depth. Together, they allow Badlands to feel both brutal and poetic. The references to Conan the Barbarian and Drax the Destroyer further reveal how the filmmakers viewed Deck's character. Like Conan, Deck is a warrior shaped by violence, exile, and survival in a harsh world. Both characters rely heavily on physical strength and instinct, yet beneath that brutality lies emotional vulnerability. The Drax influence is also interesting because Drax is often portrayed as physically intimidating yet emotionally sincere and misunderstood. Deck shares those qualities. He appears monstrous from the outside but carries deep emotional pain internally. The influence of classic westerns such as Shane and Clint Eastwood films suggests that Badlands approaches its story almost like a frontier myth. Westerns often focus on isolated outsiders struggling with violence, morality, and belonging in dangerous landscapes. Deck fits perfectly into that tradition. Like wandering gunslingers in westerns, Deck travels through hostile territory while carrying emotional scars from his past. The themes of honor, survival, and personal transformation closely resemble classic western storytelling structures. The influence of Mad Max 2 and The Book of Eli likely shaped the film's harsh survivalist atmosphere. Both films portray characters moving through ruined wastelands where every resource matters and danger exists everywhere. Jenna appears designed with a similar sense of desperation and brutality. Meanwhile, the influence of Shadow of the Colossus is perhaps one of the most important creative inspirations mentioned. That game is famous for its lonely atmosphere, giant creatures, emotional ambiguity, and tragic storytelling. Its protagonists often confront enormous beings not purely out of heroism but out of emotional desperation. The Kalisk hunt strongly reflects this influence. Deck's mission feels less like a traditional monster hunt and more like a tragic spiritual trial. The giant creature is not purely evil, and the act of hunting it carries emotional consequences. Another major achievement of the film was the creation of a fully developed Predator language. This represents a massive step forward for the franchise's world-building. Earlier Predator films only showed fragments of Yorkshire communication, usually through growls, clicks, or short phrases. Badlands decided to treat Predator culture seriously enough to create a structured linguistic system. Linguist Britton Watkins played a critical role here because designing a believable alien language requires balancing creativity with realism. The filmmakers wanted the Yorkshire language to feel authentic rather than random sounds stitched together. The decision to base aspects of the language on previous franchise material was especially smart because it preserved continuity while improving coherence. Elements from the self-destruct timer, earlier written symbols, and previous spoken depictions were reorganized into a consistent system with grammar and structure. This matters because language defines culture. Once audiences hear predators communicating fluently with one another, the species stops feeling like a collection of monsters and starts feeling like a real civilization. The filmmakers also carefully considered the physical limitations of predator anatomy. Their mouths and clicking vocal patterns influence the language's sound design, making the communication feel biologically believable. This attention to detail demonstrates how seriously the production approached immersion. Introducing the terms Yorkshire and Yorkshire Prime into the films was another major step in bridging expanded universe material with mainstream cinema. For years, these concepts primarily existed in novels and comics. Bringing them into a major film officially expanded the mythology for wider audiences. This decision reflects the filmmaker's respect for longtime franchise fans while also making the universe feel larger and more interconnected. Instead of ignoring expanded lore, Badlands embraces it carefully and integrates it naturally into the story. Making Dek the protagonist was perhaps the film's boldest creative gamble. Traditionally, predators function as antagonists or mysterious antiheroes. Turning one into the emotional center of the story required audiences to empathize with a creature previously feared as a monster. This demanded extraordinary performance work from Dimitrios Shoustakalo-Motangi. Not only did he physically portray Dek, but he also learned the predator language specifically for the role. This level of dedication was essential because Dek's emotional arc depended heavily on non-human communication and body language. The production design behind Dek's appearance was also groundbreaking. Studio Gillis created a practical creature suit for his body while motion capture enhancements were used to create more subtle facial expressions. This combination of practical effects and digital enhancement reflects the film's larger creative philosophy, preserving physical realism while expanding emotional storytelling possibilities. Earlier Predator films often limited emotional nuance because heavy creature makeup restricted facial performance. By enhancing Dek digitally while keeping practical textures and movement, the filmmakers allowed audiences to connect emotionally with him without losing his alien identity. Weta Workshop's involvement further elevated the film's visual ambition. Known for extraordinary practical and digital creature work, Weta likely helped create the detailed alien environments, weapons, costumes, and biological designs that make Jenna and Yorkshire culture feel immersive. The inclusion of Weyland-Yutani also significantly expands the franchise's connection to the alien universe. This crossover element adds thematic richness because Weyland-Yutani represents corporate exploitation and technological obsession. Their presence introduces a human element of greed and scientific manipulation into a story otherwise centered on primal survival and family conflict. The contrast between predator warrior culture and corporate industrialism creates compelling thematic tension. Filming in New Zealand was another inspired choice because the country's landscapes are famous for their dramatic beauty and versatility. New Zealand has often been used to portray alien worlds and mythic environments because its terrain can feel untouched, ancient, and dangerous. The working title backpack was likely used to conceal the project's true identity during production, which is common for major franchise films. This secrecy helped prevent plot leaks while allowing the crew to work more freely. Jeff Cutter's return as cinematographer ensured visual continuity with Prey while allowing the new film to develop its own identity. Cinematography plays a massive role in creating atmosphere, especially in a survival-focused story. The visual effects work on Badlands was enormous in scale. With companies like ILM, Weta FX, Framestore, and others contributing, the movie appears designed as a visual spectacle combining practical realism with advanced digital artistry. Trachtenberg stating that every shot required visual effects work highlights how ambitious the project truly was. Since the film is set largely on alien worlds with non-human characters, nearly every frame needed enhancement or manipulation. However, the best visual effects are not merely about spectacle. They support immersion and emotional storytelling. In Badlands, visual effects were necessary not only for creatures and environments but also for conveying Dek's emotional expressions and the film's unique atmosphere. Ultimately, the production history of Predator, Badlands reveals a film created with unusual passion, ambition, and artistic confidence. Rather than treating the Predator franchise as simple action entertainment, the filmmakers approached it like mythic science fiction capable of exploring deep emotional and philosophical themes. Every creative decision, from language construction and creature design to cinematic influences and character focus, reflects a desire to elevate the franchise into something richer and more emotionally resonant. The result is a movie that does not merely expand Predator lore but redefines what a Predator story can be. By blending savage action with emotional vulnerability, mythic storytelling, and immersive world-building, Badlands transforms the franchise from a series about monsters hunting humans into an epic tale about identity, family, survival, and the meaning of true strength. The music, marketing campaign, theatrical release, home media success, and streaming performance of Predator: Badlands together reveal how the film evolved from a risky franchise experiment into one of the most commercially and culturally successful entries in the modern Predator series. What makes this especially fascinating is that the movie succeeded not only because of action and spectacle, but because audiences emotionally connected with its atmosphere, characters, and ambitious storytelling. Every stage of the film's release strategy, from its musical score and Comic-Con presentation to its streaming dominance and physical media sales, reflects how strongly the movie resonated with viewers worldwide. One of the most important creative elements behind the film's success was its musical score. In October 2025, it was revealed that Sarah Schachner and Benjamin Wallfisch composed the soundtrack, and this pairing was extremely significant because both composers brought very different emotional and stylistic strengths to the project. Their involvement also symbolized continuity within the evolving creative direction of the Predator franchise under Dan Trachtenberg. Sarah Schachner had previously worked with Trachtenberg on Prey, a film widely praised for its atmosphere and emotional intensity. Her music style often combines tribal percussion, emotional orchestration, electronic textures, and haunting melodies. That approach perfectly suits the Predator universe because the franchise exists at the intersection of primal violence and advanced science fiction. The Yautja are ancient hunters with ritualistic traditions, yet they wield futuristic technology and travel across galaxies. Schachner's musical sensibilities help bridge those two sides of the franchise. Her compositions can feel both ancient and futuristic at the same time, creating soundscapes that make alien worlds feel emotionally immersive rather than merely visually impressive. Benjamin Wallfisch's involvement added another layer entirely. Known for large-scale cinematic scoring and emotionally powerful orchestral work, Wallfisch brings intensity, scale, and emotional drama to science fiction storytelling. His ability to create music that feels both intimate and epic likely helped Badlands achieve its mythological atmosphere. The combination of Schachner and Wallfisch was especially effective because Predator: Badlands constantly shifts between brutal survival sequences and emotionally reflective moments. The film needed music capable of supporting savage combat while also exploring Deck's loneliness, grief, and emotional transformation. For example, scenes involving Deck wandering the hostile wastelands of Jenna likely used atmospheric sound design and minimalistic musical cues to emphasize isolation. The score probably allowed silence and ambient noise to dominate, making the planet itself feel alive and threatening. By contrast, emotional moments involving Quay's sacrifice, Thea's evolving compassion, or Deck's realization about what it truly means to be an alpha likely relied on more emotional orchestration. Music in these scenes would not simply accompany the action but deepen the audience's connection to the characters. The Kalisk itself likely received unique musical treatment as well. Since the creature represents both terror and tragic beauty, the score probably combined monstrous intensity with emotional undertones. By the time the audience learns the Kalisk is protecting its child, the music likely shifts from fear toward empathy. This emotional flexibility is one reason the soundtrack became such a crucial part of the movie's identity. Earlier Predator films often emphasized tension, aggression, and militaristic rhythms. Badlands expanded the franchise's musical language into something more emotional, mythic, and cinematic. The marketing campaign for the film also played a massive role in building anticipation. Disney announcing a Hall H presentation at San Diego Comic-Con in June 2025 was an enormous statement of confidence. Hall H is traditionally reserved for major blockbuster projects with significant fan interest. By giving Predator: Badlands such a prestigious platform, the studio signaled that the movie was not just another franchise sequel but one of its major science fiction events of the year. Comic-Con presentations are especially important because they shape fan perception months before release. The Hall H appearance likely featured exclusive footage, behind-the-scenes reveals, cast appearances, and discussions about the film's ambitious world-building. Fans probably saw their first deeper look at Jenna, Deck, the Kalisk, and the expanded Yautja culture. This presentation would have been particularly exciting because Badlands represented such a radical evolution for the franchise. Fans were eager to see how the film would handle a predator protagonist, a fully developed Yorkshire language, and a story centered around alien culture rather than humans alone. Elle Fanning and Demetrius Shostakovich promoting the film at Comic-Con likely also generated strong buzz because their characters represented the emotional core of the movie. Fanning's dual role as Thea and Tessa especially intrigued audiences due to the psychological and thematic implications of one actress portraying two opposing synthetic sisters. The UK premiere at the BFI IMAX in London on October 28, 2025, further reinforced the film's cinematic prestige. IMAX screenings are associated with large-scale visual spectacle and immersive sound design, suggesting the filmmakers wanted audiences to experience the movie as a grand theatrical event. This makes sense because Predator: Badlands appears designed around atmosphere and scale. The alien landscapes of Jenna, the massive Kalisk, the Yorkshire homeworld, and the film's extensive visual effects work all benefit enormously from giant format presentation. The world premiere at the TCL Chinese Theatre on November 3 carried additional symbolic importance. The venue has historically been associated with iconic Hollywood blockbusters and legendary cinematic moments. Premiering there positioned Badlands as a major evolution for the franchise rather than a niche genre project. The theatrical release on November 7 in RealD 3D and IMAX also reflected the filmmakers' confidence in the movie's visual storytelling. Releasing in premium format suggests the studio believed the film's environments, creatures, and action sequences would benefit from immersive presentation technologies. The use of 3D is particularly interesting because Badlands heavily emphasizes alien environments and physical movement. The dangerous landscapes of Jenna, the predator technology, and the large-scale creature confrontations likely created strong depth and immersion when viewed in premium formats. Another fascinating aspect of the release was the film receiving a PG-13 rating rather than the R ratings associated with earlier mainline Predator films. This was a major departure for the franchise and likely sparked intense discussion among fans. For decades, Predator films were known for graphic violence, gore, and brutal combat. Moving to PG-13 could have been controversial because many viewers associate the franchise with hard-edged action horror intensity. However, the rating shift also reveals something important about Badlands' creative priorities. The film seems more focused on emotional storytelling, mythology, and atmosphere than shock value alone. Rather than relying heavily on graphic violence, it likely emphasized tension, character development, and large-scale science fiction adventure. This broader accessibility probably helped expand the audience significantly. Younger viewers and casual science fiction fans who might normally avoid R-rated horror action films were more willing to experience Badlands theatrically. Importantly, the movie appears to have retained emotional intensity despite the softer rating. Violence may have been stylized or implied more carefully, but the emotional stakes remain powerful. The film's success after leaving theaters is equally remarkable because it demonstrates strong long-term audience engagement rather than short-lived hype. Its digital release on January 6, 2026, immediately dominated video-on-demand platforms. Topping Fandango at Home's digital sales and rental chart for multiple weeks shows that audiences who either missed the theatrical run or wanted to revisit the movie eagerly embraced it on home platforms. This kind of sustained digital success often indicates strong word of mouth. Movies that disappear quickly after theatrical release typically struggle to maintain momentum. Badlands, however, continued attracting viewers long after cinemas. The film remaining within the top 10 for weeks suggests repeat viewing value. This is especially common for science fiction films with rich world-building because audiences enjoy revisiting details, environments, and character interactions they may have missed initially. The strong physical media performance is even more interesting because physical disc sales have become increasingly niche in the streaming era. Debuting at number 1 on Videoscan and Blu-ray charts proves that Badlands appealed strongly to collectors and franchise fans. Science fiction enthusiasts often value high-quality physical releases because they offer superior image quality, sound design, behind-the-scenes content, and collectible packaging. The success of the Ultra HD Blu-ray edition suggests the film's visual presentation was one of its biggest selling points. This makes sense considering how visually ambitious the production was. The detailed creature designs, alien environments, and atmospheric cinematography likely looked especially impressive in high-resolution home formats. The film topping physical media charts for February 2026 also reflects how much audiences connected with the movie emotionally. People generally purchase physical copies of films they expect to revisit repeatedly or consider culturally significant within a franchise. Streaming performance added another layer to the movie's success story. Flix Patrol reporting that the film ranked number 1 on Apple TV and other on-demand services demonstrates strong global demand. The fact that it dominated platforms across multiple countries, including the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, shows the universal appeal of the story. Themes like family, exile, identity, and survival resonate across cultures. The Hulu streaming debut was especially significant because the film achieved 9 million views within 5 days, becoming the platform's most watched film premiere since Prey. This comparison is important because Prey already represented a major turning point for the franchise. Matching or surpassing that level of streaming success confirmed that audiences remain deeply invested in Trachtenberg's new vision for Predator storytelling. The Nielsen streaming numbers further highlight the movie's popularity. Accumulating hundreds of millions of viewing minutes across multiple weeks demonstrates sustained engagement rather than one-time curiosity. Maintaining top streaming rankings over several weeks also suggests strong audience retention. Viewers were not merely starting the film out of interest and abandoning it. They were fully watching and discussing it. Another reason the movie likely performed so well on streaming is because its emotional storytelling encourages broader audience appeal beyond traditional Predator fans. Earlier entries in the franchise often targeted primarily action and horror audiences. Badlands expanded into emotional science fiction and mythic adventure territory. The relationship between Dec, Thea, and Bud created emotional accessibility even for viewers unfamiliar with Predator lore. Audiences became invested in the characters' struggles and evolving sense of family. The streaming success also reflects modern viewing habits. Science fiction films with rich visual details and layered mythology often gain additional appreciation during repeat home viewings. Audiences enjoy pausing, analyzing, and revisiting world-building elements. Importantly, Badlands succeeded across every major stage of modern film distribution: theatrical release, premium digital platforms, physical media, and streaming. Many modern films perform strongly in one area while underperforming in others. Badlands achieved success across the entire entertainment ecosystem. This broad success reveals that the movie resonated on multiple levels simultaneously. Action fans enjoyed the survival sequences and combat. Science fiction audiences appreciated the expanded mythology and alien world-building. Emotional viewers connected with Dec's transformation and found family themes. Ultimately, the music, release strategy, and post-theatrical success of Predator, Badlands demonstrate how completely the film revitalized the franchise for modern audiences. The movie was no longer simply a cult action horror property built around a famous alien monster. It had evolved into a large-scale emotional science fiction saga capable of attracting mainstream audiences worldwide. The score gave emotional and atmospheric depth to the story. The marketing campaign positioned the film as a major cinematic event. The theatrical release emphasized immersive spectacle. The digital and streaming success proved long-term audience engagement. The physical media performance showed lasting fan devotion. Together, these achievements transformed Predator: Badlands into more than just a successful sequel. It became a defining chapter in the evolution of the Predator universe, proving that the franchise could grow beyond its roots while still preserving the primal intensity, emotional tension, and mythic atmosphere that made it iconic in the first place. The commercial performance, critical reception, audience response, and future implications of Predator: Badlands reveal how dramatically the film reshaped the modern identity of the Predator franchise. What began as a risky experiment, placing a predator at the center of the story and exploring Yautja culture in depth, ultimately became one of the most successful and widely discussed entries in the series. The film's box office numbers, reviews, fan reactions, and broader cultural impact all demonstrate that Badlands succeeded because it dared to evolve beyond the franchise's traditional formula while still preserving the primal themes that made Predator stories compelling in the first place. Financially, the movie's worldwide total of $184.6 million by January 23, 2026, represented a major achievement for the franchise. Although the Predator series has always maintained a loyal fan base, its theatrical performance had fluctuated significantly over the decades. Earlier entries often struggled critically or commercially because they relied too heavily on repeating familiar action horror formulas without offering meaningful innovation. Badlands changed that perception entirely. Its success proved that audiences were willing to embrace a more emotionally driven and mythologically ambitious Predator film. The movie was not marketed simply as another monster sequel. Instead, it was presented as an epic science fiction adventure centered around identity, exile, survival, and transformation. The domestic box office story was particularly impressive because early projections estimated an opening weekend between $25 and $30 million. Those numbers already suggested healthy interest, especially considering the film's unusual concept and PG-13 rating. However, the actual performance far exceeded expectations. Earning $15.6 million on its first day immediately signaled that audience curiosity and excitement were much stronger than anticipated. This included $4.8 million from Wednesday and Thursday previews, which indicated strong fan enthusiasm before the official weekend even began. As estimates rose toward $36 to $38 million, industry observers realized the film might become one of the strongest launches in franchise history. Ultimately debuting with $40 million domestically was a major milestone because it broke the previous Predator franchise opening weekend record. That achievement carried symbolic importance beyond simple numbers. For years, the Alien vs. Predator crossover had represented the franchise's largest theatrical event due to the novelty of combining two iconic monsters. Badlands surpassing that benchmark proved audiences were no longer interested only in crossover spectacle or nostalgia. They were invested in this new creative direction. The film's additional $40 million internationally created an $80 million worldwide debut. Part of this success likely came from the universality of Deck's emotional journey. Although he is an alien warrior, his struggles with rejection, identity, family expectations, and self-worth feel deeply human. Audiences across cultures could connect with the emotional themes even within the fantastical setting. Another important factor behind the film's financial success was the strong word-of-mouth generated by critics and audiences. Unlike many franchise blockbusters that open large but collapse quickly, Badlands maintained strong discussion because viewers were intrigued by its unusual approach. The critical response demonstrated this clearly. Rotten Tomatoes reporting 86% positive reviews from hundreds of critics signaled broad approval from reviewers across different genres and perspectives. More importantly, the critical consensus highlighted exactly what made the movie stand out. It transformed one of cinema's most iconic monsters into a sympathetic protagonist. That was perhaps the greatest challenge facing the filmmakers. Predators had always been defined by mystery, brutality, and fear. Turning one into a hero risked destroying the very qualities that made the species compelling. Yet many critics praised the film precisely because it managed to humanize Deck without stripping away his alien nature. This balancing act became one of the movie's defining achievements. Deck still feels dangerous, physically imposing, and culturally tied to violent traditions. But beneath that exterior, audiences see vulnerability, grief, confusion, and emotional growth. The comparison made by some critics to Terminator 2 is especially revealing. That film succeeded because it shifted the perspective on a previously terrifying machine and transformed it into a protective figure audiences could emotionally invest in. Badlands attempts something similar by reframing the Predator not as a slasher villain but as a misunderstood outsider struggling against cruelty and rejection. Tim Roby's praise regarding the film's ability to humanize a story without human protagonists highlights how unusual and ambitious the movie truly is. Most science fiction films rely heavily on human characters to provide emotional grounding. Badlands instead asks audiences to emotionally connect with predators, androids, and alien creatures. This approach could easily have failed if the performances or visual storytelling lacked emotional authenticity. Instead, critics often praised the film for making its non-human characters feel emotionally real. However, not all reactions were positive. and the criticisms reveal interesting divisions in how audiences view the Predator franchise. Some reviewers argued that Deck's emotional vulnerability made him feel too human or too different from traditional predators. The criticism describing Deck as a whiny teenager rather than an underdog reflects discomfort with seeing a predator portrayed emotionally instead of stoically. For some viewers, the appeal of predators lies precisely in their cold, relentless mystique. Making one emotionally expressive risks weakening the fear and intimidation traditionally associated with the species. This criticism highlights the central creative risk of Badlands. The movie intentionally redefines what a predator protagonist can be. Some viewers embraced that evolution, while others preferred the franchise's older, simpler structure. The observation that the Kalisk becomes the underdog while Deck becomes the hunter is also extremely important because it demonstrates how the film deliberately reverses traditional predator storytelling dynamics. Earlier films usually positioned humans as desperate prey hunted by unstoppable predators. Here, Deck himself begins as prey within his own culture, while the Kalisk ultimately emerges as a tragic creature protecting its child. This reversal deepens the story emotionally and thematically. The audience gradually realizes that neither Deck nor the Kalisk is truly monstrous. Both are survivors navigating violent systems beyond their control. Critics praising the visual effects and the savage beauty of Jenna reveal another reason the movie stood out. Science fiction worlds succeed when they feel immersive and alive, and Badlands appears to have created one of the most visually distinct environments in the franchise. Jenna is not simply a generic alien planet. It feels hostile, primal, and mythological. The dangerous flora and fauna, harsh landscapes, and towering creatures transform the setting into an active participant in the story. Some critics, however, argued that despite the ambitious world-building, the emotional themes still resembled familiar stories about identity and found families. This criticism reflects an ongoing debate within modern franchise storytelling. Many contemporary science fiction films explore themes of belonging, emotional trauma, and chosen family structures. Yet even if those themes are familiar, Badlands applies them through an unusual lens. Seeing these emotional ideas explored through predators and alien creatures gives them a unique texture. Peter Bradshaw's criticism that humanizing Deck causes him to cease to be the predator reflects perhaps the most fundamental debate surrounding the movie. What defines a predator? Is it their violence, mystery, and lack of emotion? Or can the species evolve into something more emotionally complex? The film itself seems to answer this question directly. Deck does not stop being a predator because he learns empathy. Instead, he becomes a different kind of predator, one who rejects toxic traditions while still embracing his identity and warrior spirit. Elle Fanning's performance received especially strong praise because she brings warmth and emotional balance to the story. Thea acts as the emotional bridge between Deck and the audience. Her compassion prevents the film from becoming emotionally cold or relentlessly grim. Critics describing her as a breath of fresh air reflects how important her presence is within the movie's darker atmosphere. Without Thea, the story might have become overwhelmingly bleak or emotionally distant. Her physical performance also appears particularly memorable, especially scenes involving damaged body parts and combat sequences. These moments likely combine vulnerability and resilience in ways that make the character feel both fragile and powerful. Patrick Azon receiving praise for making Deck sympathetic before Thea's arrival is also significant.